I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zives Palmer.
And this is Arcade Mark. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Arcade Mark. Today we're going to be talking about describing the fantastic. Those sorts of creatures and locations and situations that really help to drive the fantasy by being something so far beyond what you could ever experience in real life. But the challenge with something being so far beyond what you could ever experience in real life is that, well, it can be harder to relate that to things that people have experience with and understand, and to paint that picture in their minds. So what we're going to be talking about today is techniques for doing just that.
That's right. So the thing that you have to realize as the GM, you don't need to be coming up with constant descriptions that are as good as your favorite fantasy novelist's long, rambling descriptions of the fantasy landscape that go on for multiple pages so that you can find out about these unusual flora and fauna and everything that's going on. That's probably not your skill set unless you were also your own favorite fantasy novelist. That's okay. You don't want to break your back making tons and tons of material that honestly might overwhelm your players and they might not be able to remember it. Even if you think, hey, now this is thorough as possible, it turns out there's a load to the memory that your players can actually withstand.
Yeah.
So that is not possible. So given that it's too hard for you and too hard for them, you're going to need to use techniques in order to describe just what you need to describe in a way that paints the picture in your player's mind.
But yeah. I mean, think about, like, if you're doing some read aloud tasks or giving a long description of what a room looks like in a common dungeon, you know, players are eventually going to tune out and they're not going to pick up all the details. The same goes for if you're just giving a long block of descriptive text about a fantastical location.
That's right. So there's a limit to what your players can process, but you're going to need to also pay attention to a very important point. It's the sort of counterpoint to that, which is you are the Oculus into this fantasy world for your players. If you don't describe something, then your players can't know explicitly what it is, and that doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily find it to be a gaping hole in the world that they don't even realize unless there's like a character that you don't say is there or something like that. But they're going to fill it in with something else. And that also means that what you don't say is going to potentially become either some sort of default that you better hope is shared, or it's going to lead to a completely separate assumption between you and the players that you might only find out about much later. For example, there's a sort of known thing among some fantasy authors or GMs where you're more likely to give like a long and detailed description of like an important character. And also some authors give longer descriptions of only the most attractive characters, and then other characters, they don't even say anything. They're just like, you know, it's like a man with a chiseled jaw and sparkling lavender eyes and a smile that graces the angels met up with her. And afterwards, she saw 3 more soldiers walking past.
Yeah.
One of which had brown hair, one of which had red hair, one of which had blonde hair. And maybe that's it. Maybe they don't even say the hair color.
Yeah,
right?
There were 3 more soldiers.
3 more soldiers walked past and gave a hasty salute to the handsome
captain, yes.
Right? And so what is going to happen there is that your players are going to fill in everything else. And this could cause some serious issues. For example, when I said 3 more soldiers, maybe I didn't say their hair color. 3 more soldiers gave a salute to the handsome captain. Now, did you assume that they were also men, the soldiers? Because maybe the GM assumed 2 of the soldiers were women and 1 was a man, and the player assumed they were all men. And then the GM started having, he's like, the first soldier says, oh, hey, there's this thing over there. And then later the GM winds up going to the players and redescribing the soldier, but like saying, you see a woman over there. It's one of the soldiers you met before. It's like, I didn't meet any soldier who was a woman because you didn't say that
Or
initially.
you're also going to see people often assuming that, did you assume that all three of them were human?
That's right. Things that can be assumed, gender, the ancestry, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe one of them was actually a bugbear, and
Yeah.
and you didn't say something you probably should have. People you might assume ethnicity. For example, people who are listening in will either assume that it's the dominant ethnicity of the fantasy kingdom where you were in. So if you're in, for example, the Mwangi Expanse in Golarion and in a Zenge city state, they would probably assume that all the soldiers were Zenge.
Yeah.
Zenge from the Mwangi Expanse. But if it turned out one of them was Bekiar, one of them was from Tian Sha. So Bekiar is another, for people who aren't Golarion nuts like us, Bekiar is another sort of ethnicity from the Mwangi Expanse, whereas Tian Sha would be like if someone was from Asia in fantasy Africa, and then some other person from Taldor, which would be like being from like Rome or something.
Yeah.
So like if as the GM somebody violates the expectations, then or anything that's in it violates the expectations, pay closest attention to that. The fact that one person's from Tian Sha, you should probably describe it. They'll assume everyone else is Zenge. If you don't put any sort of defaults, people often assume that the undescribed ethnicities, ancestries, or genders are like their own, which could wind up meaning that you have some people at your table who think different things about the soldiers. If you're just like, we're in a hodgepodge, melting pot city where all ancestries, ethnicities, and so on are here, you could have people who just have a completely different picture in their head. In some cases, that's okay. Maybe the soldier just doesn't matter to the point that who cares what people have in their head.
If the point of those characters existing was just to show the captain is respected, and then those characters don't show up anymore, it doesn't really matter, like, if one person pictures them all to be halfling women and another person pictures them to be, like, orc men or whatever.
That's right. It doesn't make a difference in that case. So these sort of fantastic descriptions are ones that might be important for you even if you're describing something that's relatively mundane. But this gets to be much more of a problem when you're describing a fantasy creature. Here's one that just came up yesterday, all right? So it's like you're attacked by two giant birds. It's like, okay, so are these giant birds because they're like as big as an elephant or a horse? Or are they giant birds just because they're giant for a bird, but they're only about as big as a person or like a child size? And then the answer was, oh yeah, they're giant as in about as big as a person.
Yeah.
So like the once you know that something is fantasy and it's outside the realm of reality, that was a good example of a back and forth where the player recognized there was an ambiguity and asked for clarification. That's something that, even though this is a GM Tools episode, if you're a player, you could start thinking about the ambiguities. But you know what? It's a collective group thing. It's nice if you do that. The GM's the only one who has pre-planned these pictures in their head. So it's probably more on the GM to try to think of that, but it's great if you're the player and you're doing some assistance there.
And in that case we had like the art of the creature, so it'll be like, these giant majestic birds and they look like this.
That's right.
So first of all, like, if you happen to have art of the thing, share the art of the thing.
You know what? They wouldn't have created an aphorism, a picture is worth 1,000 words, if it wasn't true. The art that you have is going to make it so that you don't have to give a complex description to describe a very weird, very fantasy thing. For instance, in the thumb on this episode, that's a pretty, like, complicated, like, dragonish creature. It would take a while to describe it to you so that you get that picture in your head. Immediately when you saw this thumb, you know what it looks like.
Yeah, and another thing, too, is that you don't have to have a picture that's a picture or a reference that is exactly the same to be able to do something, like, similar to this, except blank. So, that's one of the reasons why you have so many fantasy creatures. Like, if you look through fantasy creatures, there's so many of them that are, like, this is similar to a human except blank, or this is similar to a wolf except blank.
It's
or
a
this
horse
is similar
with
to...
a horn.
Yes.
It's an eagle with a lion's body.
Yeah.
A blower body, right?
Yeah.
It's a horse, but the upper half of their body is a human.
Yeah. And one of the things that you often see also is like that sort of mix and, as Mark was mentioning, is that sort of mix and match aspect where it's like, this creature has certain things you would expect of a horse, but then it also has like an eagle's head, or it also has this other situation that's going on with it. It also has like weird tentacles of force or what have you.
And you might be like, well, you know what? Those mythical creatures or those just things that are sort of look like something in real life, it's just too done. But I'll tell you a secret, which is that they are classics for a reason, and they can never really get so done that your group isn't going to appreciate them. There will probably be more, like, if you be like, no, I have to create something nobody has ever thought of before. So the Zealfatak have, like, follicles that string together almost like a connection of ribbons that form their body, and they have a combination of sort of the hyphae of fungi alongside the tentacles from cephalopods that are mixed with the fact that their eyes are compound like insects, and you have this whole thing, and you create this completely out there culture that is not connected to anything that has ever existed. They have 12 different genders, and they're each and you do all this stuff. And then your players are, okay, yeah, you try to describe it. They get a little confused. You're very happy about your creative creature. And then the next time you're like, all right, so this other creature is a cute chibi walrus. And they're like, oh, cute chibi walrus. This is my favorite.
Also notice that even when Mark was doing that, he always said they have a feature like familiar creature the entire way through.
Even though I was trying to create something that was completely bizarre.
Yeah,
and that its geometry didn't make very much sense. Yeah. But then you just say, oh, and you may spend hours on that one, and then you're like, okay, I don't have time. This is like a cute chibi walrus, and you spend 10 seconds saying that, and then your group is like, we love the walrus, they're the best creature you've ever created. You're like, oh, I spent 7 hours on the phylactery.
Yeah. Because, people are going to be more interested oftentimes in something that they can relate to.
And you're like, I didn't even create a culture. Can you tell us more about the walrus? He's a small little guy. Oh, he's a small little guy. So, seriously, though, grounding the fantastic in the relatable, in the kind of things that you know and that you've seen before is not only an effective technique for quickly transmitting the information, but it's also one that makes it more likely that the players can relate to the fantastic.
Yeah, and the whole, like a familiar thing, except it's going to be a lot easier for players to grok if most of what is there is relatable in some way, but then there's some real striking difference from what they would expect.
That's true. And so that's why generally the way that you describe the fantastic is by using the realistic to describe the fantastic. It's not exactly, you don't have to go to the same extent as the genre of magical realism where it's it's mostly realistic world with some elements of magic in it. But the main point is use what people know. Or if you don't, have a picture, because the picture, you can do something as weird as possible that doesn't really equate to anything, although at some point you probably needed to tell the artist what it looked like, or have an artist who is just so inspired and so good at what they did that from your vague description they managed to do exactly what you wanted. Or maybe you also
independently are an artist and you can create what's in your mind's eye.
Yes, you can just close your eyes and see the
yes,
and then draw them, and you won't have to describe them in relation to anything else. But it's also important to make sure that you not only include whichever features are the ones that can ground the players, whichever ones are the most unusual, and that the ones that you think the players will get the wrong defaults. You have to include all the features of something you're describing, including anything in the game world, that are important or critical for the players to recognize that they exist there. so that the players can interact with them if they're important. For instance, if there's something that the players are supposed to do with, I don't know, they have the creature has very large ears and it's weak to sonic attacks. Then you want to describe the large ears. If you just don't say anything about the ears, then they're not going to be thinking about that. Or similarly, if you are describing a room and there's like just obviously a cliff partway through the room where the floor ends, and you don't say that it's there,
or the room has like, you know, one wall that's covered in a reflective substance that like ripples like water, and the reflections that it shows are distorted to look more fearsome or frightening.
That's right. Now, the important caveat and corollary to this is that you don't want literally everything you describe to be a Chekhov's gun. And so, therefore, it's kind of nice to make sure you include some amount of description so that it's not like, oh, wow, Linda described that mirrored wall. We must have to do something with it. She would never have described something unless it was critically important.
Yeah.
This also helps understand why maybe we don't describe only the captain who's very important or very attractive or whatever has caused us to decide we were going to spend more time on him than those other soldiers, but instead at least put some amount of effort, even if it's a little bit, into describing those other characters so that it's not so blaringly obvious that there's a sign pointed to certain things that are like, this is important. Having
fantastical features that exist to exist, but not like specifically to be a gateway to XP and treasure.
Yes. Or Chekhov's gun that this person is important, or this person might be revealed to be the traitor later on, or this is where there's a secret door hidden, or some kind of a...
Yeah. You know, sometimes features just exist, and, you know, if you have enough of those, then players aren't necessarily going to be like, oh, yes, you mentioned that there's a statue, it's definitely a monster.
That's right. So, that's actually a great and important example. If you only describe the statues in the room when they are monsters, you might just say, like, the room has plenty of sculptures, statues, and art pieces when they're not a monster, but then you're like, in this room stand 4 silent statues, each holding a spear in their hand. Then people, if you only do that and they're actually constructs, people will know they're constructs.
The spears look like they might be slightly loose or a detached part from the rest of the statue.
I mean, you don't have to go that far.
And there's scuffs in the rubble in front of the statues, as if they've at some point been moved.
You see blood on one of the spears. That's weird. It's dried, but it seems like it couldn't have been there since they built it.
Also, there are bones on the ground. You can see written in blood on the ground, beware the statues.
Okay, so you don't have to go that far. But even if you didn't go that far, if you're only doing even the vague statue descriptions when they're constructs, then people know that they're constructs. On the other end, if you decide, well, it's too much of a bother, so I just won't even describe the statues even when they are constructs, that can seem cheap if you're just like, well, you know, you go into the room and there's all sorts of art and sculptures and stuff, and they're like, all right, well, we'll go to the other door. Okay, well, 4 of the statues, which had spears that I didn't mention that were in the sculptures and stuff, come out and attack you right when you're exactly in the middle of them, so you're flanked by all of them. Like, wait, hold on, I wouldn't have walked right through 4 statues that were spears.
Yeah. So you probably want to have, like, statues with spears in some of the other rooms that aren't constructs, or, like, you know, maybe it's like, oh, you know, there's a statue with a staff and a statue with a book, and, like, there's different things going on. It's not just the...
So the situation where you under-describe everything is a way to do things even-handedly, but if you under-describe even what's important, even if you try to do it fairly and are like, well, I figured this out, it should be fine anyway, it kind of just feels unfair and like you're doing a gotcha or you're out to get the player, even if you're not, if you do it that way. Whereas doing a little bit of extra description on everything is a little bit more of a chore. Don't go overboard. You don't need reams and reams, just a little bit each time. Enough that when it does come to life, your players will be like, oh, okay, you did say that was there. And when it doesn't, you haven't spent tons of effort describing it or overloaded your players with details.
I want to bring up something from chat. Mention it's also important to make sure you describe things when they look substantially different from the map. Statues are a likely culprit on many maps. Yeah, like if you have something that is a reference to the players that doesn't fill in all the details or could be misleading in some way, absolutely.
Especially if your players don't know what the basic key is that are used in many dungeon maps. If you're using a simplified map, when they're like, okay, I'm gonna go over here past that evil pentagram on the floor and say, no, actually that's a statue, just a circle with a star in it.
Yeah.
Very standardly a statue. Wait, I thought it was an evil pentagram. No, it was a statue of a lady who was holding a scythe, and then she swipes the scythe at you as you go past. So wait, I thought it was an evil pentagram. Well, you were willing to go near an evil pentagram. That could have been dangerous too.
Yeah.
But even then, like, you want people to know when it doesn't match their expectations. That comment in chat is very similar to what we were saying before about how people will project either themselves or the default sort of ethnicity or ancestry that lives in the area if they know your world setting well enough. If you don't say anything.
One of the things that I had fun with was a dungeon where eventually the PCs were attacked by evil statues, but most of the statues in the dungeon didn't attack you and just looked ominous. And I put down miniatures everywhere there was a statue, and definitely players started by like attacking every statue they went past, and they were like, oh, okay, she's just putting down miniatures for every statue. But that way, like, it helped get across the feeling of where were the statues and how were they going to interact with them.
That's
very
right.
Clear.
Also, if you have people who smash all the statues in case they're constructs, they might eventually find that some of those realistic-looking statues were petrified by creatures that can petrify you.
Yes.
And now they cannot be saved by turning them back into flesh because somebody kept smashing all of them.
Yes.
Steve. So that is
and Jenna was also talking about like not describing too much, or they won't see the forest for the trees.
That's right.
You want to make sure that like, you know, it includes the important stuff and like a little bit more to set the flavor enough so that it's not just a list of important stuff, but also not so much that they're like, yeah, you know, you're getting into the detail of how the filigree is in line with the Taldan style from the 45th century, and you show me like some pictures of various architectural styles, and you said that it's kind of like this one but not quite, and it's a little bit more like this one, and like yeah
so the issue is you know your group, what your group's interested in. Every group actually has a different threshold for what to describe, and you're going to need to find that. If it's a new group, you're going to have to work it out and sort of feel each other out on that. But also, every group has a threshold for the maximum amount they can hold in their head of these kind of details, and it's usually low for most people.
Yeah.
Unless you have that one weird person in your group who's me for my group who sometimes remembers more details.
Yes.
But you can't count on that unless you know that you have that, right? And so you need to make sure that it's not just overloading of where you've hidden the tree in the forest, because if a person did remember all of them, there's too much to realize what they should be paying attention to. But even just like that, they literally won't even remember the thing that you want because there were so many that they couldn't remember it.
Yeah. And if there's like touchstones of what they are, like, you know, the PCs go back to you've resumed this session after you know, come back and you were playing last week, and you're like, okay, you know, so you were back into the room with the rippling wall and the statue and the tapestry. And if the PCs are like, the what? Then you can, you know, refresh on that kind of thing.
That is a situation where making sure to have summaries can be good. It can be especially useful if you have someone who does remember the details or who wants to help out and do this, and your social contract is having people help out so the GM doesn't do everything, to have a designated player and have the player try to give the summary at the beginning of the session, even though, yes, of course, the GM knows more than the players, but that way you can listen, and if you want to chime in during the player's summary and say, well, when you say that wall had like an octopus living in it, I did say tentacles were coming out of it, but it's not necessarily You didn't see any octopus, just
Yeah.
tentacles. Oh, okay, sorry, I misremembered that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that way, it actually is like it serves 3 or 4 purposes beyond what you giving the summary of the GM would, because it gives you a chance to see if that player had misconceptions. It lets you know what stood out most to that player of the things that you said, whether or not they missed something that you thought was important and that would definitely make it into the summary, what they're excited or interested about, and if any other players actually like either correct something or like, what about that other thing, or they seem confused and ask for clarification from the player who's summarizing. You could potentially learn a lot more than if you're just like, all right, guys, here's where we were at, and if you're the GM, you know exactly where things were headed.
And a nice thing about that, too, is that, the players are sometimes going to pick up on those red herrings and, like, ascribe extra importance to certain things, and as long as you fill in, but you do have to be careful also when filling things in that you're not only filling in, like, the things that are, like, most essential.
That's right. And when the players give the summary, that's another benefit of it, is that you don't risk the fact that when you gave the summary, you only gave them really important things.
Yeah, but I'm saying you also have to be careful when you're filling in that you're not just like, I'm only going to correct this one detail because it's very important for later. This is exactly this way.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, why did you go out of your way to correct that the dagger was silver and not steel? Like,
that's right. So you might need to be a little bit more pedantic than you normally would be, just to make sure that you're not only Chekhov's gunning with the corrections of only super key relevant points. So the thing of, like, you didn't technically see an octopus in there, just tentacles. Maybe that isn't too important because maybe there was an octopus.
Yeah.
But they didn't technically see it. And so that way you're making a few small notes just so that you can hide the ones that are, like, more critical that you definitely knew that you would have to make, because it would screw everything up if everybody's understanding of where you were at was that flawed one. So basically, the idea is to make this a collaborative process. Obviously, as the GM, it's primarily more so your responsibility because you have more tools towards this. But players can help either because you've tapped them to help out or because they just get a sense there's something to help out with. If there's collaborative, if there's a back and forth, if they can ask questions, and especially if you have pictures, if you can show them, but that's sort of like, it's hard to have pictures for the things that you want, right? Then those are all ways that you're going to be able to make this fantastic thing that doesn't exist in the world possible for not only your players to picture it, but importantly for you as a group to have a shared vision that is maybe, if not identical, at least close enough that you all understand what's going on and what is at stake.
Yeah. So we've been talking about general things and, like, some things about locations that apply more broadly. We've been talking about creatures. I want to get into a little bit more about some fantastical locations in particular and the kinds of things that you can mess around with there. One of the things that's interesting, that I find interesting, is whenever there are people in a location who find something that is completely bizarre and weird to your PCs to be, like, absolutely status quo normal, and find something that your PCs consider to be completely mundane to be like, wait, what is that?
It can show a culture shock. It can show how fantastic this place is or this world is when you do that. And it also can help if the thing that the people in that place find to be weird is something that the players would have never assumed was going to be weird because of their life on Earth as well.
Yeah, like, is it a society that communicates telepathically and finds the fact that the PCs have a language that uses, like, gestures and mouth noises to be, like, very strange?
Yeah. Maybe these telepathic creatures evolved originally from a humanoid type culture, so they do have a mouth, but they always cover it up, and they consider it to be extremely vulgar that the PCs are running around with naked mouths, and they're even, like, using their mouth to communicate. Maybe to them it would be like to a human if somebody spoke via, like, farting.
Yeah.
They had like they had like the back of their pants open so that it could be shown to everybody else, and they just farted their entire language.
Yeah, that's how they would feel about that.
That's how they would feel about humans using their mouth to.
Yeah.
Showing their mouth and then spewing things out of their mouth like that. They'd be like, what's going on? And then the PC would be like, what? Why did they say this is rude? And just have this sort of like disconnect.
Yeah. And with the locations too, you can like having cultural values that are based off of like fundamental magical and physiological differences between like the sort of like the species that the PCs are familiar with and the species that live in a particular location. You can also mess with fundamental laws of physics. Messing around with gravity is a common one. You can mess around with the way that magic functions. Maybe certain types of magic take on new properties or are more effective or less effective. You can mess around with the way that time works, or that people think about time, or the way that they think about space. Maybe it's a place where people can where teleportation type thing is just completely natural because you can travel between places quickly if they have close ideological connections.
Yeah. So subverting expectations is something that is not only expected, but is a good thing to do. But make sure that when you do, you really are subverting expectations, but in a way that things are well defined and well described. There's a difference between subverting expectations and like under describing something and then someone realizes a while later that they were wrong about what they were imagining and that their characters should have known like from the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
So subverted expectations is where even the character didn't or couldn't have seen anything different, and they didn't realize until later that things weren't as they seemed. And that has a way different feel than if it's like, no, my character obviously would have seen that the sky was purple. Why have you told me this after 12 sessions in this new area that it was purple?
The sky was purple and there were 3 moons.
Like, if the sky being purple was important and I can now make a knowledge check on that, why couldn't I make that immediately?
Yeah.
So, like, you need to make sure that the surprise and the subversion is one that equally should be surprising and subverting the character, and not just the player because you didn't describe it until now.
Yeah. And if you realize that you were like, oh, I intended for this guy to be purple because that means something, but now I forgot to say it, then you can maybe try to come up with a reason why this guy wasn't purple until blank, and then that means something. Like if maybe this guy is purple whenever the monostorms come in.
Or you can say, guys, I made a mistake. This guy should have been purple this entire time. I'm sorry.
You can roll checks about this.
I should have told you. I thought I had said it was purple, but I realized I did not. And you can go ahead. I know this might have changed how your characters responded when you first came out in here, but we'll play it by ear. At least then you're making an admission about it, whereas if you just kind of are like, yeah, this guy's purple.
Yeah.
And when you roll on that, that means that there's a toxin in the air that is slowly been killing you for these past 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, that's why I was saying, like, you could make it like it wasn't purple yet, but now you see that it's turned purple. That turns purple when the toxin concentration is rising, and then you know that this is when things might start to get dangerous.
Basically, if you mess up on the description, you can also sort of change things to try to make a compromise or to make things work out. The key feature is that it matters what feels fair and what feels sort of like your players get the sense that they are tied in well to what their characters are experiencing and that they're not separated by this veil that is putting a curtain on it and not letting them see the actual things that are going on.
Yeah. And if when you're describing things as just being, this is completely incomprehensible, like your eyes can't even process what they see or whatever.
And they start to bleed by how incomprehensible it is.
Like, that kind of stuff can work sometimes, but it also doesn't give it to just get across the sense of like, okay, weird, we need to back away from this, but it doesn't really work for like sustained experiences because people are just going to be like, oh, this looks like nothing. It sounds like nothing. they're not really going to be able to latch onto that.
It's full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you take these techniques, then you can see, even though it's the GM tools, you need to work together with your group. You need to be careful about what you describe. Don't over-describe. Don't under-describe. Don't only describe certain things. Think about what defaults your players have in their heads. If you do all of that, you should be able to describe the Fantastic in a way that will have your players really understanding what's going on. And of course, any art you have is a huge plus. As always, if you can find it, you can use it.
And look for opportunities to check in with your players about their understanding of the situation. All the more important whenever the circumstances are bizarre or complex, because those are more likely to introduce miscommunication.
100%. So, that's about what we wanted to say about painting a picture of the Fantastic with your descriptions. So, thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe, or even hit join if you'd like to support us. Let's vote for next Saturday's episode of Arcane Mark.
Looks like David already voted for one.
We have one vote for one, which is Build an Item Workshop. Our choices are Build an Item Workshop, Ask Arcane Mark, Save My Game Q&A, Arcane Mark Plays Dawnsbury Days, where we would go in with the new magic system, that the Essence casting system, Aldemon Element, or other.
Tyranny is missing from the poll this week because we were running a little behind on our setup.
We were a little late.
Our regularly scheduled Tyranny will return when we have time to come up with an idea for it.
Yes, we knew we were going to be 2 minutes late, even with not coming up with Tyranny. And all right, so we have 3 votes for.
It looks like we're going to be playing some more
new
Dawnsbury
magic
Days.
system.
Sounds good.
I mean, Rico knows all about this magic system, but we will play Arcade Mark Plays Dawnsbury Days with the new magic system, because that's 3 to 1 vote. It'll be next Saturday, which shall be
here.
There. Oh, okay. I see it closed down. It'll be the 5th of July, so it's gonna be the 4th of July weekend. Don't miss it if you don't want to see a new magic system. All right.
Rohit asks, is there a way we can know about the magic system before the episode?
You can't. It's not for the mod is. I believe that the only people who have it are the person who created it and the person who. Like the people in head of the project and me, because I write the magic system.
There's 3 votes for 4 now.
Wait,
4's tied with Dawnsbury Days at this point.
4 is tied with Dawnsbury Days, even though math guy Dave said specifically he was going to come on here to vote for Dawnsbury Days. I think because he thought Dawnsbury Days was 4.
Oh, wait, he meant 3. Yeah, because it's always 3, but not this time. Okay.
So
it's not tied.
Go. It was
one of the 4s has changed to 3. Yes,
tied.
I know it's always 4, but like we said, we didn't have time to come up with a Tyranny right before this episode.
So also the book that it's in is also not out yet. So literally the only way you'll be able to find out about it until like a month from now or whenever it comes out, sometime in early August, late July, I don't know, is to watch this stream. So, but what is known so far is that it is like not Vancian, so you don't like have to worry about daily slot resources and stuff. So, check it out. We will play Dawnsbury Days on Saturday. And yes, it is in Magic Plus. That is correct, but Magic Plus is not out yet. It is the magic system that I wrote for Magic Plus. All right. Take care, everybody. We will see you on Tuesday when we're going to be talking about... what are we talking about on Tuesday? Whatever one the last time was the Tyranny option. Whatever the Tyranny thing was, maybe I still have it in my...
No, because we deleted it out because of the fact that it had won, right? Or no, you already changed it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I already changed it before I copied and pasted it just now. So, whatever it is, we'll see you on Tuesday or on Saturday for the new magic system. A bold new magic system, says Kojo. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty bold. All right.